The first tier of Cataclysm is tier 11, and as you know, we got the 4.34 balance, but we got the 4.04 or whatever gear, and the classes are not gonna work as intended because of that. There is a lot of weird balance going on in tier 11, so let's talk over it. Let's make a tier list for all the DPSers. First of all, the Affliction was a pretty decent spec, Affliction Warlock. It was a decent spec in the later tiers, but early on it needs quite a bit of gear to work out because it needs procs and stuff, so it is not gonna be really that good. Of course, there is a war spec for Warlock in this tier, but yeah, I would say a B tier is okay. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. On the other hand, the Arms Warrior, and this is a very common thing you're gonna see now, melees in tier 11 kick butt, okay? There is a lot of movement in tier 11, there is a lot of burst fights in tier 11, for example the petals, the plants, the whatever in Throne of the Four Winds, that kind of stuff, and as such, things like the Arm Warrior, who is already a very high, very powerful spec, kick complete buck. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, but isn't it that the warrior takes more gear to scale and that's when it becomes good? No, that's a classic thing. In Cataclysm rage is normalized, so as soon as you get your hit cap, which isn't even that hard, you start kicking butt right away. The assassination rogue is also pretty decent. Of course it takes off a little later too, but without gear they're still very useful. There is a lot of fights that require stuns in Cataclysm 2 early on, so you got that going for them, but the damage is pretty good. Now the Boomy, okay, the Boomy provides a 3% crit for casters, and 3% crit when you got no crit is super important, okay? It's one of those things where like, their damage is decent about A tier, but at the same time you really wanna have a Boomkin, because so many of the casters in Cataclysm require crit to work, especially with the 4-3-4 balance. And there is no crit in the game yet, the gear is kinda crap. So ironically the Boomkin becomes a lot more valuable than it otherwise would be. And for that reason we're gonna put the Boomkin in S tier too. The Beast Mastery Hunter, even though it's my favorite hunter spec right here, I gotta say it is not up to par. I mean, it is pretty good in tier 11, because like you don't need a lot of gear for your pet to do damage. Your pet will scale with gear, guys. That's one of the changes in Cataclysm. Your pet does scale with your gear, but it is not very good even early on, even though it's a little better early on. So I'm gonna put it on B. It's okay, I would gladly take one of these. The good thing about the Beast Mastery Hunter is they got access to cool buffs. As you guys know, the Hunter has all the buffs. And yeah, if you are in a Terman guild, even if your Hunter is not very good, you probably wanna take a Hunter anyway, because you're always gonna be missing a buff or a debuff, and they got all of them, so yeah. The Combat Rogue on the other hand, okay, the Combat Rogue, the Sword Rogue, it does a lot better. I would say it is falling behind the Assassination Rogue, maybe a little ahead in some fights. It kinda struggles with fights with movement on it, combat is not great for that, but the raw output potentially is a little higher. Honestly, as long as I get a rogue, I don't really care, it's a rogue. What's the difference? Same difference, just take one, A tier. The Demonology Warlock though, even without gear, is absolutely fantastic. The Demonology Warlock likes stacking Mastery, that is a lot easier to meet early on than getting crit or something like that. Also, like all their good abilities have high base damage. So yeah, that's gonna make the Warlock one a very formidable, even early on, very formidable DPSer, and they are gonna go to S tier. Now, I don't know why there's a Blood Death Knight in a DPS tier list. I just saw this. The Blood Death Knight is a tank. Ironically, most tanks would be like an S tier DPS right there, because of how vigilance works, you know, the more damage you take, the more attack power you gain. They could get a little stupid. I've seen like really stupid damage coming out of Blood Death Knights. But yeah, I mean, like, is it worth it putting on a tier list? Is it fair? The other tanks are not even here. No, we're gonna skip it, okay? Frost Death Knight, very good early on, actually. They don't need a lot of gear, they don't need a lot of hit, they don't need a lot of crit, they just work. That's one of the cool things about classes that stack strength over, say, agility, is they come online a lot earlier. So yeah, ironically, it would be a total meme in other tiers, but now I'm gonna put it on B tier. Okay, I would play one. Unholy on the other side is pulling off ahead even still. Of course, Unholy is a lot harder to play, a lot harder to pilot, but yeah, I would like an Unholy Death Knight. I wouldn't want to mess with this guy, it's going on A. Elemental Shaman on the other hand, okay, raw numbers, they are about B tier here, maybe A tier. They are not bad, but the problem is they are not as needed as they could be on other tiers, because what they got is their main utility, let's call it that way, I don't know how to call it, is they got a lot of burst damage, they got a lot of cleaving damage. In tier 11 there is not that many fights with cleaving, there is a lot of fights with AoE, there is a lot of fights with like long fights, but there is not a lot of cleaving here, so they will fall behind because of that. I'm gonna put them on C. I would gladly take one, because Shaman is Shaman, but I don't think they are nearly as strong as they become. But when you hit Firelands, okay, they become a straight S tier, but right now I don't think it is. And I would say the Enhancement Shaman is even worse, okay? The Enhancement Shaman, the problem with it, even though it's okay, it's decent, if you gotta hit your haste cap, then you gotta hit your hit cap. Okay, you need those stats to actually work as an Enhancement Shaman. Haste is super important for you, your haste values, because of how you work. And that is gonna screw you guys. Maelstrom weapon without your haste values is not even that much damage. So for that reason, that's gonna be our first meme. Next meme. Okay, no, actually the cat is pretty good. Now the cat has the bleeding debuff, everybody wants the bleeding debuff. Remember, Arms Warrior is the best DPS in this tier, so of course you wanna buff the Arms Warrior. They can also bring 5% to all stats, like a Paladin would, so of course they got a lot of really good buffs here. Not to mention that free trap 3% melee crit, that's also really nice. Like, crit is super important when you got a little of it. When you got a lot of crit is not nearly as significant as it was before, because of how procs work, right? And they do decent damage. I mean, they are pretty good. I would say I'm gonna put them on an A tier. Okay, I love a cat. Everybody likes cats. The Fury Warrior, on the other hand, is in the same position as the Enhancement Shaman. They need their haste values, they need their hit, and they need a lot of crit. And even then, they are not nearly as good as the Arms Warrior. But right now, without gear, badass naked, they are absolute garbage. They do not work. Oh, I touched my microphone. Poor microphone. They do not work. Okay, they suck. They are going on meme. Arcane Mage, on the other hand, is nothing like the TBC or the Wrath of the Lich King Arcane Mage. It's actually like really fun. You got a charging phase and a dumping phase of mana. And the good part about that is that you do not need a lot of mana to work. You don't need, I mean, mana helps, but you don't need a lot of mana to work this thing out. You can come online pretty much right away, and I would say they are gonna do nasty damage in tier 11. In fights like Throne of the Four Winds, the Conclave, they are usually at the top right there. They are not the best mage for Throne of the Four Winds, even though they do the most damage. We're gonna break that down in a second, but they are still amazing. I love Arcane Mage, and they are the best they could be in this tier. On the other hand, the Fire Mage, once again, we get to the same position here. I'm not gonna say it's a complete meme, because it's not. It is not a complete meme. Fire Mage is pretty good, all things considered, but it needs a lot of crit, okay? The problem with Ignite and how it works, because it's like 20 to 40% of your damage, you need a lot of crit, and you don't have a lot of crit. So you are not gonna get those nasty fat multipliers, you're not gonna get those nasty fat procs. And as such, your hot streak of, for example, you need 2 crits in a row to get your free Pyroblast. That is not gonna happen on this gear, in this tier, okay? So for that reason, the Fire Mage is not great. I'm gonna put it on C, because I will still take one even though they are bad. But yes, okay? One thing that you can do if you do not like the Arcane Mage, believe it or not, is going Frost, okay? You do have to hit your crit values to be effective as Frost, but the thing you gain from doing this is that as a Frost Mage, you are one of the best people to deal with the Conclave of the Four Winds. There is a part of the fight where you get an ice block and like you can skip an entire mechanic with it, so Frost Mage is always gonna be, if you know what you're doing, it's always gonna be in demand in the Conclave of the Four Winds. And they still do decent damage. Of course, the Arcane Mage is completely gonna poop in their butt, but still though, they are respectable. They are about B tier. Maybe in Conclaves of the Four Wind they would be A tier, but let's be honest, their damage is not great either. We're gonna put it on B tier. Now the Marksmanship Hunter is really not working out in this balance. They completely gutted the Marksmanship Hunter in 4-3-4, and they never really recovered. And I mean, I could break down if I think they are gonna be better this tier or not, but it just doesn't matter. You shouldn't play one. They are really bad. Retribution Paladin, on the other hand, you do not need to hit any crit values, any haste values, any hit values even, really, to do a lot of damage. You ignore armor with a lot of your kit, which is absolutely great. You bring buffs, you bring the blessings, you bring the auras, you bring everything somebody could ever want. Similar to the Frost Mage, you can even bubble in a part of Conclave of the Four Winds and save your entire Raida mechanic, so they are also very handy for those kind of fights. And I just think the Prot Paladin is freaking amazing, so since the Prot Paladin is freaking amazing, we're gonna put it on S tier. And they really do not fall off, guys. If you are looking for a long-term investment, the Red Paladin is still gonna stay very strong later on in the tiers. It never really falls off. It might get to A tier by the time you hit Dragon Soul, but that's still good, okay? If you like the Red Paladin, this is probably the expansion for you. Now, the Shadow Priest over here is gonna be one of the most overpowered ones because it is about on par with like the S tier DPSers. It does a lot of damage. It comes online right away, really. They don't need a lot of gear. Even though they do scale, they get everything, these guys. That's the problem with them. They get everything. They got good cleaving damage. Of course, cleaving damage is not nearly as important as I said, but they are still gonna pump. They are weaker on the AoE side, which is also not that important right now in this tier, but they bring the Hymn of Hope, they get the Divine Hymns, whatever, they can do a bunch of healing. Of course, they got a bunch of passive healing to the raid too, and that's very crucial in tournaments too. The Priest is just freaking super important. The Shadow Priest is always a good choice. Like, you're gonna see in Cataclysm right now, like, every time you go to trade chat, people are gonna be like, looking for Shadow Priest, looking for Shadow Priest. It doesn't matter if you look at the chat in tier 11 or tier 13, people need a Shadow Priest, and that's not gonna change. Now, the Salty Rogue is a spec that I don't understand, and I think nobody understands it because nobody plays it because it's absolute crap. There you go. I love to see that in the comments. I love to see the salty enjoyers in the comments get really mad at me when I say it. I'm gonna say it again. It sucks. I wouldn't play it. I wouldn't take it to my raid. Now, the Survival Hunter, what can I say about it? It is basically Beast Mastery, but better. A lot better. And you always want a hunter in your raid anyway. So yeah, they are going S tier. I don't think you need much explanation. They do a trillion damage. They got all the good buffs that a hunter can bring, which is every single one of them. Hunters are absolutely crucial in Cataclysm. They went from one of the specs with the least utility to one of the specs with the most important utility. And this is gonna be my tier 11 assessment for this first raid tier, okay guys? Let's see if my predictions come online, okay? We don't know what Blizzard is gonna do to Cataclysm. We don't know how the fights are gonna be tuned. We don't know really if they're gonna mess with balance, because Blizzard is not gonna allow certain classes to be bad. Paladin. Warrior. Oh, I said that out loud. I was thinking that one. But yeah. Well, I look at these guys over here, maybe they are gonna do some changes to them. But overall, I say if you're picking something in S tier or A tier, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a good time. If you're B tier, I would probably still take you to the raid. I would even take an LA Shaman. I would even take a C tier guy. I was like, one of the cool things about Cataclysm is that there is very little difference between like a top of the line specs and a more or less okay spec. It's not like in vanilla where the warrior is doing a trillion damage and everybody else is doing like half. It's more like a 10-20% difference, and that's easily something you can make up with a good player. I would take a good Elemental Shaman over a bad Arms Warrior every single time. Subscribe, leave a like, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.